I am a Sacramento native. Grew up here. My dad was in the Army, spent some time in Kansas, spent some time in Germany. But other than that, like, I came back here in 6th grade and I've been here ever since. So I just start by saying that because, like, this is my hometown. This is like the place that I'm here and I've been here for reasons other than just I love the place. I had kids here. So a lot of like my background comes from just wanting to see Sacramento be better, really. And with that, you know, I started as a musician. So 2002, I had a group called Righteous Movement, toured all over California, and I got to see, and throughout the states, and I got to see like the system of what I can say now is the creative economy in other places. So I would go and I would do a show, and there would be this guy that's standing next to the group giving him like a chat. And I was like, yo, who's that guy? And they were like, that's his manager, or that's their manager. And I was like, oh, we don't got those in Sacramento. Whoa. And then there was like, you know, a woman that was prepping them and then walking them over to like the press. And it was like, who's she? Oh, that's their PR agent. And it's like, oh man, we don't really got those in Sacramento either. How do we get those here? And so that became kind of the journey of Unseen Heroes. We started to do PR for my band, management for my band, which then kind of went into this others area because people would see the things that we were doing and see that we were on the cover of magazines, seeing that we were touring, and then saying like, who did it? And at the time I was just like, it's me and my wife. Like, well, she was my girlfriend at the time, but, and so from that, you know, I just really saw this problem existing in Sacramento, and we went to address it because I didn't want to see my homies fail. And so it was like, yo, you need us to do your press kit. You need us to do your marketing. Come on, we'll help you out. And so from there, I kind of learned like, we had this pipeline issue. I can say that now, but it was me living through it. It was just me trying to survive through it. And then that led to us doing events, which then led to us meeting corporate companies and then them saying like, you guys know how to throw cool events. Like, how do we get involved in that? And I was like, you just want to meet my friends? And it was like, yeah, we want your friends to be there. And it's like, cool. So then it became they hired us to then connect with community. And so then that's kind of where we got into just doing events and bringing corporate companies in and things like that. And then that grew. And then it went to then developers hiring us to do things for their areas, which then led to a whole slew of us being PR, marketing, events, community development, I say now. But it's been a 14-year journey the hard way. And so the pandemic really allowed for us to really sit with why, and I hope we'll talk about why, but that kind of is like my background.
Wow, I just learned some stuff about Roshaun. I never knew either, so that's impressive. I'm Scott Ford. I work for an organization called the Downtown Sacramento Partnership. I too consider myself a Sacramento native. You know, kind of lived in Los Angeles for about half my childhood, and then went to high school up here. And I think like a lot of Sacramentans, I felt that once I finished high school and was going off to higher education, that I was being drawn into the creative industries, and I didn't think that there was a place for me here in my hometown, which is sad. And but you know, went off into the world and spent time living in Los Angeles and New York, and really got exposed to what a creative economy you know, could be, and what the possibilities were. And as I got older and you know, really evaluated what was important in life, you know, I wanted to come back to my hometown, I mean, part of it was I had been following the Kings relocation saga for a long time, and Sacramento had done something that I couldn't believe that the city was doing. They were doing something really big. They were, making an investment to keep the franchise here, which, I happen to be a Kings fan. Obviously, I've got a shirt on, and I love the Kings not because they're the best team in the world, but because they represent us. They represent me, and but shout out to the squad this year. They're looking good, but that said, I did want to come back. I knew that. I mean, the point is that I knew that Sacramento was on the verge of having some really big opportunities surrounding what this development was, and I knew that growth was inevitable, but the way that we grew, we could have a say in that, and I wanted to be a part of that conversation. So that's 2014, I guess, what drew me back to Sacramento. And in retrospect, I'm so glad that decision was made, because it's been an interesting 8 or 9 years. But I think that's kind of helped shape, like Roshaun, I took the scenic route in life, and I'm glad that I did. It's been a struggle most of that way, but that has helped shape, I think, the perspective and the skill sets that lend itself into the work that we do every day now. And I think that getting into the work, I mean, people think of the partnership as probably a stuffy business organization, and I think that there is a lot there that we can look at the creative side of what we can do. I mean, the pandemic, a lot of challenging things, but the upside is that we've got a chance to really rethink and reshape our community. I think about it a lot as far as mobility goes. I mean, we built a central grid that was literally the worst thing that you could do for a downtown. It was meant to bring as many people in the morning and get them out to the suburbs as quickly as possible. Now we're in a position with updates to the grid where we're going to be turning one-way streets into two-way streets. We're going to be investing in pedestrian infrastructure and biking infrastructure and making a transportation system that works better for everyone. And I bring that up because I think of that in terms of the work that we're doing in the creative economy and the vision and the leadership that Megan brings and all of the great creatives that we have right here in Sacramento. And that's really the thought that I put in behind economic development, which is, what I focus on every day. But I really think of place-based economic development. If we start with place, place is infinitely fascinating. I mean, that is Sacramento's unique value proposition. And if we can foster an environment that values creatives and artists the same way that we value knowledge jobs and tech companies, and when you think of cities trying to get as much of that in your system as possible, I mean, creatives really tell the unique story of your place, of Sacramento, in the most compelling way, and that's going to be something that's going to be a great driver, and I think that we're in a position really right now to shake things up, and as it relates to K Street and other critical corridors, not just in the central city. Of course, downtown we focus on, with our organization. I think downtown is everyone's neighborhood, so I think it's an important place to start, whatever community you're in. But when you think of all the great neighborhoods that we have in the city and the commercial corridors, there's opportunities that I think this type of approach is going to be beneficial throughout the city. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on it. But Roshaun, you want to build upon?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love sitting in conversations like this because, to me, we speak different languages, and it's cool to be able to sit. And that's what I've been doing for like the last 2 years, is being able to sit and have conversations with folks who are collaborative, want to see the same things. But when he said economic development, for us for 14 years, that was just us making money. Right? And it was us trying to make money. And it wasn't until the pandemic when I had to stop and look at everything that we were doing and call the homies and be like, hey man, like, how much did you make at Gather Oak Park? And then they told me, and it was like, every month you made that? And it was like, yeah. And it was like, but you're one vendor and we had 70 vendors out there. Let me call somebody else. How much money did you make? Okay, let me calculate that up. All right, cool. Oh, that's $3.5 million that we made at one event for our local economy or our local creatives, but we didn't see it that way. And we did that for 6 years, right? 6 years. It was this thing that it was economic development, but it was just the hustle. It was just the hustle for us. And so to be able to collaborate like this, and I think Sacramento is in a great space for this. It's like you have folks that are in different organizations that are willing to come to the table and have conversations like this, so we can then bridge the gap and say like, oh, okay, that's how we work together. If you're talking about economic development, I have a practical application for economic development. How do we make that work? And then to piggyback on your place-based development standpoint, I'll never forget during the time of the pandemic, not knowing what I was going to do, I had a call with an impact investor out of Philadelphia, and he was like, "Tell me about yourself." Told him about what we did, and he's like, "Okay, I get what you guys do. You guys are placemakers, and they call you placemakers." And it's like, yeah, they call us placemakers. Like, I don't know if I like that, but yeah, this is what it is. And he's like, okay, but what keeps happening is you create place, and then you get displaced. And I was like, exactly. Like, you're dope. Like, keep speaking to me. Keep speaking. And he's like, okay, cool. So you're a placemaker, you get displaced. He's like, what you need to move into is placekeeping. And I was like, my man, never forget, Damian Dwin. And that was the moment that I was just like, yeah, that's the language that we need to be speaking. And he's like, do this, focus on place. And if you focus on place, you get everybody else on board. He's like, when you focus on race, you split it. When you focus on economics and things like that, you split it. But when you focus just on place, you can bring everybody to the table because everybody wants to focus on just place. So from that moment on, it's been place-based development for us and putting together a strategy that focuses on it. And if we know that we're not good at something in that place-based strategy, we'll bring in a partner, right? So we don't really focus on youth from 0 to 18. So now we're building partnerships with folks that do focus on youth from 0 to 18 because they know how to do that very well. And that's part of like the place-based strategy that comes along with this place-based development. But it does start, and Scott and I were talking about this in our pre-call, but it starts with ownership. Because I know a lot of people in here that are very creative, and if we continue to create culture in these spaces, we will continue to be displaced because we don't own. That's the piece, right? And take it from me, I've been displaced like by 4 different neighborhoods in Sacramento. I don't know how this keeps happening, but it's that. And so when we were talking, it's like, how do we start that? It starts with ownership. It starts with being stewards of our neighborhood, but actually figuring out models to where we all own, and then we can talk about like the actual place. So let's talk about like K Street and the things that you see, and then the things that we know from that standpoint. No,
those are great points, Roshaun, and I couldn't agree more as far as the ownership goes. I mean, and that's honestly, that's one of the advantages of a place like Sacramento right now. I'll share with you candidly. I mean, after college, lived in Los Angeles and was pursuing various creative avenues to generate revenue. And, at a certain point, my now wife and I looked at each other and said, we're never going to own here. We're never going to, it's just going to be a constant hustle, and struggle trying to keep our heads above water. But coming to a place like Sacramento, that was really a game changer for us as creatives and just as people who came in and started with nothing. And Roshaun might not remember this, but I came back to Sacramento in 2014, was working at a restaurant in Midtown, just trying to figure out where I was going to land. And Roshaun came in with his family, and I waited on him, and I just remember so engaged with me and wanted to hear a bit about what my story was, what my narrative was. And again, you might not remember this, and don't mean to put you on the spot, at Centro.
Yes, yeah. Exactly, I do it.
But I remember being so inspired that I was coming back to what I felt was my hometown, even though I'd been away for a long time. And there was such a sense of genuine, you cared about what my story was, who I was. And so coming back into a community really resonated strongly with me. And what drew me to the work with the partnership was driving down J Street. And I said, what is going on here? We can do better than this as a city, as a community. Like, I want to be a part of this. And I knew nothing about this line of work other than just kind of the own, just my own experiences in various other industries. But I knew that I wanted to be a part of positive change for a city that I cared about. And that's what originally drew me to the partnership. And, and I keep learning along the way and keep collaborating, and I try to listen more than I speak. But I think that the opportunity that I'm seeing right now is exciting, especially as it relates to critical corridors like K Street. 4 or 5 years ago, I think there was less of a willingness to think outside of the box and to take chances. And I think right now we've got some opportunities. There's a lot of talk about what state-owned buildings are what the future of that's going to be. We know that hybrid work models, telework, that's not just a 2.5 year fad. I mean, this accelerated trends that we knew were already in place. So how do we come together and think as strategically as we can as a community about what we want the central city to be, what we want these spaces, these old buildings, they can house new uses. Jane Jacobs, it rings true now. We've got some tremendous opportunities to rethink what this community is going to be. And I think by really thinking of creativity is capital, as Roshaun has said, and really thinking about Sacramento's unique value proposition is nobody else is doing the stuff that the people in this room and many others are doing. This is our message to the world. When we talk about projects like the expanded Safe Credit Union Convention Center complex and, of course, the Golden One Center, I think in terms of rooms and hallways when I think of cities, the rooms are those key anchors, and we've made some really big investments as a community. Now, how do we connect those rooms, that hallway in a meaningful way? And when people come to Sacramento, for whatever reason, to visit family or for a business convention, their perceptions of this city largely revolve around downtown, and that's what people see. And oftentimes people's perceptions of Sacramento, and I'm going to be honest, is they have no perception of Sacramento, or it's certainly not a very positive one. So we've got these great investments. We know that people are going to be coming in, utilizing these spaces. How do we tell the Sacramento story in an honest and compelling way on these connector hallways that we have? And K Street really represents that opportunity right now. And so I think thinking of creativity and thinking of art and thinking of the city as a canvas, that's how I think of it now. That's why I like placemaking and place-based development, placekeeping. Thank you for correcting me. You're right. Placekeeping. I really like that because the city is our canvas, and we can really, do some exciting things that are going to yield secondary benefits that, of course, is important too.
Yeah, and I think it comes with bridging the gaps. And I don't know, I think it's the Virgo in me, Faith. I could see the gaps so clearly, right? You see them too? Okay, cool. And so, I think about it, and let's take K Street for, the model of place-based development. We're talking about, what is it, 13th Street?
Yeah, 13th to 7th, give or take.
Pretty much, but we can go to the end of Safe, right? What street is that?
So 15th is on the east side.
15th, yeah. So 15th, can we go all the way through Old Sac?
We should.
Or is that too long?
No, that's
15 blocks.
We absolutely should.
Okay, so that's 15 blocks right there. So the thing that I've learned is and this goes into that language piece too, there's just different gaps and we're all focused on different things. So the more that we can kind of hone in and say okay, if we're focusing on 15th to Waterfront along J and K, okay, that gives us a little bit more focus, right? But the thing that I feel is a gap here in Sacramento is we have people working at different levels and they don't communicate, right? So Greg, I'm gonna point you out. Greg, what's your title? Planning director. If you guys don't know who that is, you should know who that is. He's one of the main people in the city. He's the OG in the city. If you guys really, Greg is the man, right? He's no Greg, right? And so we have Greg, planning director. How many years forward do you plan, Greg? Your team? 20 years. He's working 20 years in advance for Sacramento. So you should know Greg. High level. Let's go down to the street. What's happening today? Ryan, raise your hand. Tony, raise your hand. These two men are owners of Tiger on K Street, doing the work right now. So when we talk about dreaming these things up, they're already doing it. That story that Tony just told us right here, like, can I tell this story, Tony? Yeah, so the Kings win yesterday. He gets a text from who? Herder. And he says, hey, can I come through to Tiger and have just a little private dinner? That's connection right there. And then they have a private dinner for how many people on the team? Just 12 people on the team after they win an epic game. Right now. That's happening right now. That's like the on the ground, right? But then you have Scott right here, which is DSP, who is working on the whole area as well. And how long do you guys plan out in advance?
We look at we look at long-term planning for sure, but we look at the immediate right now, especially coming out of pandemic. So we've got our short-term priorities, and then we've got, the 5 to 10 year plan that we look at. We do think, further down the line, but we look a little more medium run.
And that's perfect. So we have people who are working in the present, people who are working in the interim, and people who are working in the future, 20 years. I can't even think a year ahead. It's a gift. It's a gift. But if we start to connect those dots more and more in all of our different corridors, then we start to work together more, right? And have conversations together more. And that's what truly creates I feel like it doesn't have to be 10 years from now. Like the plans that Greg and his team are working on, the current artist in this room can say like, okay, how do we creatively make this happen? And then work with DSP and the P-BIDs and all the other state organizations or the city organizations and say, we're going to look at this differently. We see the plan, but then let's create it in a way that's fun or exciting but it takes that level of communication and collaboration to really put place-based strategy and place-based development into play.
It's great stuff, Roshaun. Yeah,
Just been thinking a lot.
Yeah, no, I love it.
2 years with no events.
Woo! Gave you some time.
Feel like I got a master's in this stuff now.
Well, I think a lot of what Roshaun there said is, it's all spot on. But I think that what I really think about right now is that we've revamped the strategic plan that our organization has. We do a lot of, we do a lot of inward studying of what's going on in Sacramento, who's doing things, how can we fan the flame of creativity to broaden sort of the impact that our organization can have. And that really is just amplifying what's being done in the community, whether that's art, whether that's music, whether that's, just any other area. So that's definitely a role that we want to play. But I think that just, there's a lot of opportunity right now to be tactically disruptive in an exciting way, and that's what is really. I won't lie. It's been a stressful run for a lot of industries, but the beauty is, the silver lining and all that is that we get to rethink and we get to rework, and it's not like stuff was working perfectly before, I'll be honest. So let's make stuff better, and and that's I think the opportunity that's ahead of us, and what I'm really excited about in the short run, and I'm really confident that it's going to transform this into longer term success. I will say we look at a lot of peer cities. When I say peer cities, I look at a lot of other state capitals, and you think of cities like Atlanta and Austin and Nashville and Denver, and those are all capital cities, but you don't think of them as government capital cities. You think of them as hubs of creativity and culture and great food and about 10 other things that that really help drive the identity of those places. And Sacramento, I mean, we definitely have had that inferiority complex for my lifetime and probably beyond. But like, we've got no reason to have that. We've got a lot of great things here and all the talent that those other cities do. So I mean, let's tell that Sacramento story and let's work together in a meaningful way to do it and rewrite kind of what the next chapter is going to be. So I'm optimistic.
That's a perfect segue into the next panel, I think. Dope.
Roshaun and Scott, thank you so much for some of that early conversation. I know there's cool opportunities before us. My job is to transition to this awesome group of people right here who I've had some opportunity to have conversations with a little bit in recent days, which is great, and allow me to introduce them. We have Estella Sanchez, who's the founder and cultural strategist at Soul Collective. Woo-hoo. And Trisha Rhomberg, artist and business owner, Old Gold and Maker's Mart. Laurelin Gilmore, artist and business owner, Amatoria Fine Art Books. And last but certainly not least, Liv Moe, the nonprofit director, the executive director of Verge Center for the Arts. Thank you. So at the risk of revisiting history a little bit, because I know there are definitely conversations that have happened before, and I just want to acknowledge that. Let's just kind of start a little bit with some of the major initiatives that have really defined Sacramento's history of work in this artist-led space, because it has been going on here, for sure, and there have been really some shining moments, and things that we can certainly learn from. And that's actually what I'm interested in hearing from you all as you look back onto some of those cool things that have happened here. There's certainly some folks in the room that may not be familiar with all of that history, and so I hope you'll maybe start by sharing, like, what are the things that really come to mind for you that have really defined this work here?
Should I start because I'm holding the microphone?
Yes.
Well, lots of things come to mind, but I think through the lens of Verge and what I've been thinking a lot about over the last 2 years, during the pandemic, we have this huge archive that we inherited from the Center for Contemporary Art when we merged with them in 2014. And, when do you ever have time to sit down and go through an archive, right? So I decided, well, we can't go anywhere, we can't do anything. This is a really good time to do this. And so I start cracking these boxes open, and I discover that the center was part of a city initiative in 1987. And they had decided, Sacramento decided through a cultural plan, that we needed a contemporary art center because there wasn't one prior to that. And this amazing consortium of people came together, arts leaders, arts patrons, philanthropists. There were 2 curators from Los Angeles, members of the RCAF, and they put together this committee and stewarded the first iteration of the Center for Contemporary Art into being. So then fast forward to 2014, 25 years later, the center merges with Verge, and we inherit this archive. So that was one of the first really kind of like amazing, kind of earth-shattering things for me, because I came to the center probably in 2002 or 2003. At that point, it had already been around for a while. And I had no concept that the city had set it in motion, nor did I know that there was this confluence of people that all believed that it needed to exist. So, I think that for me, one of the lessons really was that at any given time when you think you're doing something remarkable, there's probably somebody who thought about it before you, and almost assuredly. And also, Sacramento has this history through just what I've seen over the last 20 years of having a lot of energy, starting something really exciting, and then it doesn't quite get enough support or infrastructure underneath of it to keep running. And then whoever it was that had all that amazing energy that launched it does something else, and then you know, it's like the tides. They just keep ebbing and flowing before something really continues to wash away.
The thing that comes to mind is just some of the work that was done in the 60s and 70s by Chicano artists in Sacramento, and just the movement of political art that brought a lot of different people to our city. So the work that was done by the RCAF and silk screening, a lot of these posters and work that ended up, you know, becoming these like iconic images in history books that really ended up being focused here in Sacramento. So a lot of the work that they did to get murals across the city, a lot of these beautiful murals that you see at Southside Park, the underway going into Old Sacramento, K Street, were done by that group of folks, by the RCAF. A lot of them ended up becoming educators at Sacramento State, so a lot of us were able to get, you know, had the opportunity to be influenced by them, to see them in our community centers, the spaces that they opened up, Washington Neighborhood Center, La Raza Galeria, these community spaces that were collective spaces that are still around. And so that's what really comes to mind. And then the ceremonies that were initiated 40 plus years ago. Dia de los Muertos has been going on 42 years, 43 years, 40 something years. I don't want to get in trouble because I think there's some, they say, different people say different years, so it's 40 something years. That still happen at St. Rose Cemetery. There's groups of families of children of the people who initiated these ceremonies still hold space for people to come together and do these beautiful art installations, altars, and gather and do cultural gatherings. The ceremonies that happen at Southside Park with the Mexica community, with the Danza Azteca, the dance, all of this beautiful arts and cultural traditions that were started 40 plus years ago are still going on. So those are some of the things that I think about that folks have had to invest in them in order to happen. I still don't think they get any kind of investment from anyone else. I think it's still families who put their money together to have these arts and cultural traditions happen. So those are some of the things that come to mind in terms of what's been going on and what's still happening.
Gosh, I'm a little embarrassed to say I'm not sure if the city can take credit in this, but obviously WALL and the Warehouse Artist Lofts, like affordable housing for artists, that's huge. I mean, all the people that live there, we've been there for 7 or 8 years now, and I know that we wouldn't be able to do like First Fridays. I wouldn't be able to have my business or do makers marts or start block parties and things like that. Because we have an affordable place to live, it affords us the time to plan events and create like community happenings. So that's something that's cool. I know that CADA and there's federal grants. There's a lot of people involved in helping make that happen, not to mention, of course, like Ali Yousefi and private developers, but that's something I'm really grateful for that I'd like to see more of in the city, that I feel like is something I'm hoping that they can look at and recreate or create more of. So that's been really exciting for me, and I know a lot of people appreciate it and want to see more of it. There's been a waiting list to live there since it's opened, so there's definitely a need, and that's been a big step in the right direction. So something I'd like to see more of.
I don't know how much I have to add to the conversation other than to say that I've lived in Sacramento since '98, so some of the things I've seen come and go that I was very proud of, I don't know if they have much to do with city policy, but the art collectives that have come and unfortunately gone in a lot of cases, from what I've seen, those are the things that have kind of helped to prop up neighborhoods that are otherwise struggling. And I live along Del Paso, so like the Kumba Collective and the Gallery Horse Cow that were there were kind of staples in the art community. And they were kind of trying to, I know that they were trying to kind of expand to create artist live work lofts in the area, and some of those things have kind of faltered in the interim. But that's just to say that in my experience in Sacramento, it's mostly been individuals that have created the most change. There are places where It really does just come down to a small group of people wanting to do something cool. One of the great things about Sacramento, and it may be getting off topic here, but one of the great things I love about Sacramento is that in our creative community, it's so intensely collaborative and communicative in a lot of ways, not every way, but in a lot of ways, that basically if you want to do a thing, if you want to have like an underground rave fashion show art thing with music, like you can make it happen. You know 10 people right now that will make that happen. But that's kind of been the history of it. When you were talking about the struggle, like the hustle, it's kind of always been that in Sacramento, that it feels like we need to have, I know I'm getting off topic, I'm sorry. We need to have like something like an artist directory. I know, Faith, you've been working with putting together an artist directory. Like right now we can get on the artist directory for Los Angeles to get called for shows and things like that, and we don't have that here as much. It's not as integrated. So it's really just been, as far as I've seen, it's been individuals making those things happen.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm thinking back to a panel, what was it, 2 weeks ago? 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, that they did for Design Sacramento. And we were talking about kind of the state of the creative community. And I had actually, like, because I'm a geek like that, pulled out the framework that they put together for investing in creativity and the domains of work. And I asked the panelists, Liv was actually one of those panelists, there were others too, just like, where do you think we're strong and where do you think we're weak? And the strongest, like almost to a person who was on that panel, everybody really talked about communities and networks as being one of Sacramento's strengths. And so it does kind of speak to a little bit about what you're talking about in that vein. That's great. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, you know, one thing that certainly I've heard since I've been here, and things that have really significantly changed in recent years, is venues and opportunities for the promotion of the arts and music and entertainment. I know even before I got here, so I came in September of 2020, there were venues that were already closing. And even since the pandemic, we've also seen galleries close as a part of that. And I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the forces that are at work here. I mean, it's entirely possible that there were preconditions existing, right, ahead of the pandemic that also contributed to some of this. But when you think about, just can you think about that just a little bit, what you've seen in that space and maybe what you think is really kind of contributing to that, maybe even outside of the pandemic, right? What might have been existing ahead of that is really making it harder for those organizations and businesses to survive.
You're talking about the loss of art spaces?
Yeah.
Like
art spaces,
galleries.
music venues, galleries, like it's running the gamut at this point.
I'll say, as a person who co-owns a business now, that ownership is really like the biggest hurdle, I think. But I know that that's not the case for everyone. For most, I mean, I own a bookstore, so like for most bookstores, if you don't own the building, you're on a clock, But anyway.
I was actually thinking about this today because, not to bring us to a down note, but I started my day finding out that a friend had died unexpectedly. And he owned the Book Collector. I don't know how many people in this room remember the Book Collector, but it was really cool. And he also started something called Poems for All, and published these little tiny poems that would get distributed around the city. And he was just a remarkable human being. But one of the things that first introduced me to Richard was that he started putting art shows in his bookstore. And at the time, none of us thought about the fact that it was a bookstore, because Richard was really super smart. And he was always doing really cool stuff in the store. And so even though it was just this little makeshift gallery in the front of a bookstore, it was cool, and if you got a show there, it was very cool. And it was a lot of performative stuff. And Richard moved to San Diego about 10 years ago. So I had forgotten just how much impact one person can make in that regard and how important that space was for a period of time. And I think there's kind of a combination of space constraint and expense in being able to put on the sorts of things that give you that freedom. So I think that's definitely part of it. And, I also think sometimes there's this idea that something I've seen evolve over the last 10 years or so is this idea that you have to market something or brand it, or it has to be super professional looking. And I think the thing about what Richard was doing that was so special was that he just didn't give a shit. He met a really great artist, and that artist got to show in his store, and he met a good poet, and the poet got a little book published, and that was it. And if anybody wanted it, great. And if they didn't, they didn't. And I think that that's, I've been thinking about that lesson a lot today.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind. I think one is just the culture of how we value art in the city. Like, I don't think we value art in the city. Like, we don't put money behind it. People don't think about spending money on it. And I say this just going to other cities and seeing the way that art is valued in those cities. I'm like, oh, we don't value art here. It's our culture, and it's something we can shift and that we need to shift. From hiring creatives to buying art, it's, you go to any other city and you can tell the difference. You're like, oh, okay. Like, I'm a consultant, so what I get paid in another city, which is why I'm always traveling, is very different from what I'll get paid here for creative work. So that's one thing, that there needs to be a cultural shift of paying artists and paying creatives fair wages in the city. The other thing is just definitely ownership. I think is so important. I think, 7 years ago when we hit the 10-year mark, we've been around for 17 years, which is pretty amazing to have an art cultural space for 17 years. I'm still tripping off of it. Like, what? Like, how did this happen? Why am I still doing this? So we've come a long way from, getting moved from our original space and finding a vacant space and being able to dream about buying it. So when we hit the 10-year mark, I was like, oh, this thing isn't going away. Like, this is going to be here past us as founders, and we need a space for arts and culture for people of color in our city, and we need to make sure that we lay down some roots and that we get it before we get gentrified out. And we were already seeing that happen. And at that point, I wasn't able to afford a building in the neighborhood I grew up in, which was Oak Park. So I'm like, I can't even afford anything in my own neighborhood anymore. So I need to figure out what to do. So that was, I think, is really important. I'm glad that we did that back then, because it would have been really hard to do that now, and that we just thought ahead, that we're going to make sure that we anchor in some roots, we figure it out, and that we have ownership for the generations that come, that there'll continue to be space. And I look at Washington Neighborhood Center as, a place like, oh, that it's still there. There's been generations of people who've grown up there and had an opportunity to utilize that space and use that space. And as a young person, I got to volunteer there, and I became a program director and kind of got to learn, like, oh, the community came together and we're able to get this space, and it's still here for us. And the people who did that aren't even here, but this space is still here. So we really just thought about that, like, how do we do that? So I do think it's super important to be able to have space. I don't think necessarily you have to own it, right? Because there's a whole lot of stuff that comes to it, but be part of a collective, right? Be part of collective ownership, figuring out how to come together, share resources, and, be able to be in a place where there's some ownership. So I do think that's really important for keeping places up and going.
I don't know whether to answer the first question or ask another one, because I'm like, how did you do it? And did the city help you? Because I mean, Olivia and I started Bows and Arrows in 2007, and it's been a lot of years of me paying rent. And I remember when we moved into Wall, I remember asking Ali, I was like, can I do like a rent to own thing? I'm renting the shop downstairs, and up here, like, I want to be here forever. I want all the work that I do to, like, not kick me out. 'Cause, like, every single year my rent goes up, right? So all, like, the block parties I started, I was like, shit, like, God, I love doing this. And, like, all my friends, like, the bands got paid, and we got to do this, and it worked, and this was cool. But, like, wait, shit, like, my rent is going to go up because of this. And, like, wait, there's like 25 or 50 property owners that we asked to contribute to the funds to pay for the block party, to, like, help pay the bands and help volunteers, like, and they didn't contribute. So like, wait, what am I doing? What do I do? I can't own this, but I like being here. And like, I can't afford a house like in Midtown around 11th and R. And I want to keep going, but so I'm like, I don't know how, like, did the city help you? I want to know more about it. And I remember talking to you years ago when you guys were buying your building. And I know there were a lot of people that came together to help do it, but it's also like a lot of money. But to keep running a business, like being a mom, then doing Maker's Mart, like a nonprofit event, and then like, you know, like an employee quits or gets sick, then you're like, shit, well, wait, I want to talk to the city, but like this fundraising, and it's hard to feel like you have support to think about all the things and keep them all moving at the same time.
Trisha wants to go there, and so we're going to totally go there.
Okay.
I think we should, actually, because it's on the list, and I think that's, you know, one of the things that we talked about, like that artist creation displacement cycle, that creating value that unfortunately, because we don't have the capital to go in, like our capital is creative capital, and yet it's not valued in the same way as financial capital often, and then so those folks that have the ability to, it's extractive later. So it's almost a disincentive, right, for the arts community to engage in this work because of the effect of that. And so as a result, this ownership conversation that we've been having all night becomes really important. And I mean, I think we're lucky because we have like 2 organizations sitting right here that managed to do it. So let's unpack it.
Yeah, so I'll start. First of all, we never thought we'd ever be able to own a space. I mean, it was just a dream, right? Especially going from having multiple jobs to just be able to do the work I was doing for years, having no salary for so many years. Like, even having a salary, like, that still sounds crazy. We get paid to do the work that we're doing. It was always investing it and having another job to pay for this work that we were doing. So to go from that, right, in this 17-year trajectory to ownership, it's crazy. But I think I'm going to shout out Brian Fisher, who some of you all may know, who's done a lot of different work in the city. Brian owned the building next to us, and he had saw the work that we did in Del Paso and helped revitalize that street because there were empty buildings all next to us. And when we were first there, that started filling up. And then we moved to 21st Street, and then that started filling up. And he said, I bought this building next to you because you guys are here. And then we have another art gallery, and then, you know, another nonprofit thrift store. So he's like, you need to own your building. Like, I bought this building, you guys need to figure out how to own your building. I'm like, I have no idea, you know, how we do that. So he walked me through the process. And oftentimes he would go and speak to banks for me because I'm like, I'm scared. I'm coming in as a Latina. And he's like, I'm the white male spokesperson. Let's go. Like, I'm going. And honestly, sometimes it takes that, as we all know. There's a lot of discrimination out here. And going into banks, people are like, why are we going to lend to this person? What are they doing? It's a nonprofit. And so he really had to come in there with me and like sing the praises of the work we've been doing for so long. He looked at our finances. He's like, you're in better shape than most of the businesses I work with. Like, you're good. Let's go. Like, let's take this into the bank. So one, I had an ally working with me, walking me through the process and saying, we can do this, which was really important to have. And especially, you know, it's intimidating. Like, you know, we're trying to purchase a building, talking to banks. It's intimidating. So it was really wonderful to have someone who was willing to speak on our behalf. We went to multiple banks. They're like, no, we don't get it. It's a nonprofit. How do you guys make money? How does this work? We don't get it. It's hard to lend. We went to credit unions, kind of same thing. This looks great. We believe in it, but I don't know. We finally found Community Vision, which is a nonprofit out of the Bay Area that does funding for nonprofits, does a lot of equity work, social justice work around art, food, activism. And they came, we showed them all of our stuff. They're like, oh yeah, like, you guys are in good shape. We can totally figure this out. So that was a long process, a lot of, you know, learning. Their application was crazy. Everything was crazy. So it just took a really long time to get all of the paperwork together. Probably about a year and a half, 2 years, probably, with the whole process of figuring out, even as a nonprofit, like, do we have a credit score? I don't even know. Like, how does that all work? So figuring all of that out. So it took about 2 years. And we ended up getting a loan from them. We did crowdsourcing. We don't have any, in the 17 years we've been around, we don't have any corporate sponsors in the city. So if anybody knows any corporate sponsors, we've been around for 17 years. We have no corporate sponsors, no business sponsors from anyone in the city. I think at that point we had a really minimal funding from the city itself. I had really great people that would reach out and still do and say, have you applied for this grant? You need to apply for this grant. Literally telling us we need to apply, but we had really minimal support at that point. We did crowdfunding. I think we got $6,000 in total from the city, knowing we're trying to buy a building. So we got $6,000. Most of those were our friends who put in money to buy it. And at the time, we were doing a lot of fee for service. We had to really diversify revenue for a really long time because you can't really depend on grants. And so I was doing a lot of consulting within the organization. Every skill I have, every skill my husband has here, sound production, video production, lighting, staging, what do you need? We got it, So that's how we were bringing and generating revenue for our organization, was through all of our skill sets of everybody in the organization. So that allowed us to have funding, non-restricted funding that we could use then for a down payment, because it was money that was not coming in from grants. It was money that, wasn't earmarked for anything. And we were able to, we had enough for a down payment for the building and got the loan. So that's the way that we were able to get it. Like now, I've been on the board for Community Vision for the Central Valley. I work with other nonprofits to just kind of demystify the process of purchasing a building. I recently got asked to be on their executive board for Community Vision, and they're actually looking at investing in Sacramento. So I'm really excited about joining their board so that we can make sure that we're getting different groups and organizations on the radar for funding. But yeah, that's how we got it. We've had it for a while. We got it at a really good deal before everything went crazy. We have equity in it. We've been through the long process of developing it. We also had dreams of going up. We can go 7 stories up in that building. We could put housing. We want cooperative space for other small nonprofits and organizations to come in. Community kitchen, the patio. I mean, we have long-term vision for it, and we've been sharing this vision for a really long time. So it's a slow process, and we see ourselves as stewards of it, because I may not be around to watch the whole thing, but we have the architectural plans for it. We're working on the patio. We, made it to the second phase of getting funding to, create the backspace and redo all of the electrical. So there's this whole, this whole slow movement of making it happen. And then we have the younger generation that sees the vision so that we can pass the baton, because we know it's a slow process, especially if we don't have funders throwing money at us and we don't have this huge support. But we would love for it to be another space. When we saw Wall and that come up, we're like, oh my God, this is what we've been dreaming about, a space for artists, activists, educators to have livable space, affordable space in our city in order to be able to stay here. So that's just kind of how we, what we did, and some of the future vision of what we hope to do.
And did Community Vision, was it the Northern California Community Loan Fund? Yeah. So I always forget that they changed their name. So when we worked with, so Verge bought our building through the Northern California Community Loan Fund, and we closed escrow on it in August of 2013. And it was kind of a similar situation in terms of, like, we had no equity. And when we had the opportunity to buy the building, we started initially going to private lenders, and they won't let you borrow equity, I found out. You're not supposed to do that. So we did all this searching, and we found out about community investment lenders, and somebody actually had told us, so we had a board member who knew a guy in Northern California that worked for a different community investment lender that did farming. And he said, hey, I have this colleague who's on the board of the Northern California Community Loan Fund who had just closed a deal with the Luggage Store, which is a great space in San Francisco if you've never been. But anyway, so they had just completed this project with the Luggage Store. And in reviewing their history, they were initially started because they were supposed to be funding art as one of their primary initiatives. And by the time we had connected with them, they hadn't funded an art project outside of the Bay Area in 12 years. So their board had basically said, look, you're the Northern California Community Loan Fund. You are not the Bay Area Community Loan Fund. And there are art things outside of this region that are also cool. And like you guys, it took us forever. It took us, I think, a full year. The application process ended up being close to 200 pages long. But I will also say, you know, by the time that we started doing this, you know, like Estella, I had all these side jobs. I was an adjunct professor. I was a vintage clothing dealer for a little bit. You know, I put together any possible thing I could to make enough money to keep myself going because I was not getting any money really from Verge. So the fact that I have a salary also is something that I wake up every day and think that birds are singing outside my window. But, you know, the one drawback, so it is completely doable. We got the loan. It was amazing. But it came with a $35,000 annual balloon payment because that's how they covered the risk of the fact that we borrowed $225,000 in equity. It's also kind of an interesting side note that in Sacramento, it's that difficult for an art center as big as ours to just get donations that would cover that, but I'll just keep that to myself for the moment. A lot has changed in 10 years. I'll say that. People trust us more. But anyway, so eventually we refinanced it through the state of California, and that got us out of the balloon payment. So, but I mean, it takes like so much creativity. It's completely possible. It just takes like a mountain of creativity.
So a lot of what the two of you have been working with has been with regard to nonprofit organizations, and for us, we are a for-profit organization, but we also consider ourselves an arts organization because as a fine art bookstore, all we work with are arts. Our bookstore is entirely based in the arts, so you know, like most used bookstores will have like a section. We have 1,200 square feet of art books. Nothing but art books. If you want to know about the history of Sacramento's creative culture, we have books on that. There are some out there right now. If anybody wants to pick any up, I'm serious. But what we've come up against with regard to getting money, and at the moment, we're not even talking about owning our building. We're just talking about operating expenses to keep our business going, because what we want to do for Sacramento is expansive. We provide space for poetry readings, for book signings, for art shows, for artist talks, for musicians. We have makers fairs. We have all of those things going on, and we want to keep building on it. We have requests all the time for people who want to come in. We had a person, they said they could come and teach a tango class there because you can teach it in small spaces. And, you know, I mean, like all of this outreach. And we have books on dance, so like it ties in, you know. But we need capital in order to be able to do that. There's only two of us running the organization or the shop. And when we've reached out, we've come up against a lot of barriers to funding for for-profit organizations. And I understand that nonprofits, I think that there's room for all of us, honestly. I feel like, obviously, what these women are doing is essential to the lifeblood of the city. I feel like if the city wants to grow a full creative economy, then there has to be room for all of us. So for an organization like ours, which does plan to have a great deal of our business being about giving back, we come up against things like we took over a business during the pandemic that was closing, so we're not eligible for any funding that has to do with, you know, losing income based on the pandemic. We're not eligible for any of those grants. We've applied for all of them. We're not eligible for any of them. And going to get loan funding, because we're so small and because there's only two of us, we come up against them literally saying, like, yes, your business is succeeding, but you as an individual don't make enough money on your own to be able to pay that back, even though our business would be able to pay that back. So there's just these little barriers that come up without any regard to really what we offer, what we give back to the city as an art space that is also like an educational space. Like I mean, I'm an artist, but I went to City College, like I never went to university. And I used to frequent this art bookstore when I was going to school. And for me to sit there and be able to give back to people who also cannot afford to go to art college, who can come in there and have their entire master's program on the shelf. Like, that's what we offer, in a time when a lot of people are struggling with having to drop out of school because of student loans and things like that. Like, for real, like, they can come there and learn the things that they would at a university, just on our shelves. And if we don't have funding and we don't own our building, then at any time, we have a wonderful landlord who really did us a solid, but at any time it can be pulled out from under us, you know?
Share something on that. I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is the ability to partner with groups and nonprofits that don't have that structure as a fiscal agent, to be able to provide that support so that people can apply for grants and funding for arts and cultural programming that they're doing via a fiscal sponsor. So I think not enough people utilize that and know that they can partner with a nonprofit and to be able to apply for funding. And I think we provide sponsorship for about 10 groups right now. And we hold a little bit over $1 million for other groups and organizations. On top of our budget, we are holding another $1 million for the groups that we're providing fiscal sponsorship for. It's a lot of back end work, right? But also as a nonprofit, it's been great because it's allowed us to have a full nonprofit accounting team working with us and to really strengthen our back end admin after 17 years, which I would have never dreamed that, oh, I don't have to do everything. Like, we have a staff now, we have an accounting team, we have these things put together, and we're still figuring out. But that was a dream. Like, I never thought I wouldn't have to do, you know, everything from scrubbing the toilets to like trying to fix the internet. Like, we did it all. And to get to this point where we have, you know, a lead admin person, we have, you know, I think we have 8 full-time staff now with health insurance in an arts organization. Like, what? You know, and are able to then provide that back-end support for these other groups and organizations that, like us, for so long didn't have that support. So that's something I would really encourage you to find a nonprofit partner so that you can apply for arts and cultural funding.
But I will say, and this is just me jumping in, not serving as moderator, but just in general, that the arts have always been this sort of ecosystem of activity. And the people that I know, or at least many of the people that I know who are working with the arts, within the arts, my brother being one of them, professional musician, he's like moving in and out of different channels of production and distribution all the time. He might be doing work with a nonprofit. He might be doing work, with a for-profit. He's got his own work that he's doing. And so these architectures that have been set up, by nature of it, and then we think about like, well, where are we placing our investment? Like that. I think it's a legitimate point to say, how are we making sure that all of those different elements of the ecosystem are supported because different people are accessing them along the way. I think it's also probably worthwhile to just note, like these kinds of organizational anchors who do own their buildings and the contributions they're making. I mean, we've got Sac Open Studios coming out of Verge, and they've got all of the work that you're doing. So they're really important that those organizations are sound as a part of that backup space of support for artists and creatives. You guys were talking, there were a couple of other things that kind of came to mind as you think about, when I was in Cleveland, the market dynamic there was totally different, right? Like there's a lot to be discussed about that. It was a slow growth market. So there was time for us to work in partnership with community development and do some planned interventions and also work with, yes, properties were being picked up by people in California, by the way, and held and having no investment at all in the neighborhoods where they were. And that's ultimately why they created a land bank. Mm-hmm. There was the county treasurer who said, hey, this is not cool. We need to do something better here. He modeled it off of the work that had actually been done in Genesee County, Flint, that's my hometown, y'all, to actually do some of this. And the idea was that then the land bank was working with the community development corporations and putting that into their hand. And ultimately what we did in Collinwood was that artists could buy a property. So the CDC would get it for $100, like a house. And then they would sell it to the artist for $4,500, but a lot of that was like costs associated with what they needed to do with the land bank and things like that. And then there was a list of things that would need to get done in terms of that property. And we saw a lot of artists get into ownership because of that. So it's like an interesting policy tool, right? I'm looking at my colleagues in the room that are sitting over there from planning and economic development and the like, right? These tools that exist, how are we really using them to help enable this kind of ownership? I could imagine, like I'm thinking even to the Bay Area and the CAST model, Community Arts Stabilization Trust, is a really great model for this work. And so how does that kind of thing happen? But I'm thinking about like community ownership, which is something that we've been talking about like since I got here, and the role of artists and collectives in kind of facilitating some of that and coming together. And I'm curious maybe if you guys can talk a little bit about like what is the state of those kinds of collectives, for those of you who can answer it for sure, that could be built upon for these kind of community ownership structures. Because to be honest, like even that's working in commercial real estate too, which is something that I think we need to challenge. I think really as an artistic community, as a creative community, who has the power? There's a lot of developers that have power, you know, so how do we upend that, and how do we create these structures that will allow us to band together to be able to give ourselves something? So I'm just curious, like, you know, does that infrastructure really exist, or could it, I mean, we've clearly got one.
Yeah, and there's two things that come to mind on that conversation. One, I have to wonder, as we're talking about all of this, where Airbnb and VRBO fit into this conversation. Because at the time that Verge first moved into its building, which was 2010, before we bought it, to 5 years later when we started having more exhibitions and bringing artists in from outside the region, we had to put them up somewhere. And it blew my mind how much of the neighborhood around Verge has become Airbnb or VRBO. I'd pull it up and it was just like all these little apartment complexes, all this stuff around us that I had been looking at for decades suddenly was an Airbnb. And that has got to have an effect. It just does, because that is not housing, you know? So that's one point. The other thing that, you know, is still getting its legs under it, but during the pandemic, we started the Sacramento Alliance for Regional Arts. And one of the reasons for doing that is, and it's artsforsac.org, if you want to look it up. One of the reasons we did that was because during the pandemic, which was so scary, you know, seeing livelihoods for artists being threatened, seeing the funding for organizations being challenged. And then when we would have community meetings, some of the top-down conversation that was happening was not responsive to what we knew that we needed. And so, you know, that is still a developing thing, because all of us that are really trying to keep it up right now are all primaries in the different organizations that we lead. And so our ability to keep it going is really difficult. But, you know, that being said, I think there's an opportunity there for more of us to come together and start doing things like having forums with people that are running for office before they actually get into office, and, you know, holding people accountable when they do get elected, and to say, like, look, it's not that we're telling you have to do everything we want, but we do vote. We do have people who support us. We do pay attention to what you do, and we're going to remember that next time you're running. So, you know, those are things that I think we need to start thinking more about so that we have a more substantive presence in the region.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's actual structures in Sacramento. I feel like there would be. I think more around agriculture and food programming, that there's structures where people are coming together to collectively purchase land. I feel like I've heard that in Sac more around food systems. I don't think I've heard of any groups coming together and creating new structures for buying property around the arts. I definitely hear it in other cities. Like, there's all types of different ways that you can do it, collectives, CDCs, you know, people having their own real estate company, you know, collectively, and then purchasing property just for the sake of art. So I've heard of a lot of different ways that people do it, but I have not heard or know of any groups in Sacramento. There may be, but I haven't heard of anyone doing that. I don't know. I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time. You know, Roshaun's a part of our board. We've been, you know, going back and forth about a lot of the different possibilities. And even, yeah, just the idea of how do we come together and collectively put together our resources to own property, you know, own land. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of learning we can do. I know he's been learning a lot. I've been learning a lot, even being on these boards, just finding out what's available, what's possible, and getting an understanding of how we can use that within the arts. I mean, that's why I'm taking the time to even get on these boards. It's just to learn this whole other world that we knew nothing about before but it allowed us to buy a building. And it's like, how do we get information? How do we learn more? How do we share that? We don't need another building, but I know that there's arts organizations in our city that do, and if they're going to invest and they ask me to be on the board, I'm like, I'm going to have to do this. We need some representation in here. So there may not be, but I think that's kind of the direction some of us are trying to go into, is to figure out how we can do that.
It's great. So I'm getting the helmet to be able to go to Q&A. I mean, at the risk of having other conversations. There's clearly more to discuss on this point, but I really appreciate everybody's contributions on that. I want to bring up. Can y'all come up over here or find a place? We can just scoot up together. Just to give an opportunity for folks in the audience who might have questions. There's so much even on my list that I really wanted to explore. There's conversations as you're kind of coming up here, I've had conversations about the way that there's planning, really functional government related things, right? Like how we classify our kinds of businesses. Because it shouldn't surprise anybody, we don't fit in a box. But it's like kind of hard, and that's affecting things. So you got to do it. Just keep moving. Yeah, I'm gonna stand up. That's what I'm gonna do. Yeah, I'm good. I've been sitting. So there's lots more to this conversation, I think, in terms of. Are you good? Everybody good? Yeah. Just squeeze up. Just about like lots of other policy things about how our arts and entertainment districts are really shaping up, and what or how are they being shaped, and by whom? Who has the power to shape them, I think are really key questions. So lots more for us to discuss for sure than we're going to get to tonight. Otherwise, we could be here all night.
I have one comment and a question, though. So when you were talking about Sacramento's sister cities, one thought I had talking about someplace like Austin, right, where people don't think about it as a state capital. I also just think that the identity of Austin is so distinctly different than probably culturally what people think the identity might be of Sacramento from the outside. And I think it's really odd that California seems like it would be such a cool state. So then you have the capital of California, which must also be innately cool, but it's actually weirdly conservative in the way that it promotes its culture and what it invests in. And I think that's just odd. That's it. It's not a question. It's just an observation.
Just a comment. All right, I want to open it up just for other folks, just questions that this might have prompted for folks. Can I steal a microphone from you so we can get it? Is that cool?
Thank you. Observation, first of all, we're seeing increasingly more and more concerns of the almighty buck for developers and commercial space. And yet with the pandemic, we've learned that maybe commercial space isn't so important anymore. So we saw this wonderful development with the vacancies on the first floor and the residentials above. So why doesn't the city come together somehow with a fund and requires developer to rent those unused spaces for like a moratorium of 5 or 10 years at an affordable middle price housing occupancy rate to support the art in our communities?
I'm going to take that as a comment and request that my folks from the city who are focused on that note that question for future reference. I mean, I will just say internally, just in speaking to that, there's a lot of discussions going on some of these kinds of topics, and at least for our part at the Office of Arts and Culture, we've been really working. That's why those folks are in the room, really very closely with planning and economic development and community development. Neighborhood Development Action Team is here, to really make sure that we're connected, because the more that we're talking and the more that we're hearing from all of you positions us to be able to build solutions. It's kind of like one of the things we didn't get to touch on, but as I was reading or rereading, Trisha's interview in Articulator, one of the things she talks about is the role of arts translators and how important those really are between the various groups. And I think that kind of thing is critical. And I think even Laurelin, you were telling me that there was discussion about like along Del Paso, vacancy taxes, and what would that mean, in the deployment of that, and how could funds from that be better utilized for this sort of thing. So I don't know that I have an answer, but I think that by working together and having greater conversations, there probably is an opportunity, and talking with the policymakers, right? We have something to contribute, but let's just make sure that the people that are creating the value also get an opportunity to capture the value, meaning the creative people that are creating that value. Anyone else want to respond to that? Those are my thoughts, because it was a city-related question.
Oh, is there a response to that, or should I have another question? All right, here's the mic for you.
Yeah, I was wondering if Scott might talk about how we turn this into community building and not just placing art, but for artists that are thinking about how do I participate in this, what are you looking for, and how do they get money from you?
Well, thanks, Ed. Yeah, I mean, I think that I probably talk about it broadly just because I don't want to box in kind of any, I don't want to put limitations on sort of, kind of where we want to go with creativity and so I think that's probably why I keep it pretty broad, but also we're still putting together a framework. I think we're all trying to figure out what the opportunities are right now, and from how can we incentivize underutilized spaces, in really critical parts of our community to be used in more meaningful ways, but both in the short term, but also paths towards permanency, as we say, how can we, what's being done. And so recently we saw, I was down in San Diego and saw some models of some former, federally owned properties and sort of the master developer model where it's a arts nonprofit that is sort of leading that, leading that approach. And so with that structure in place, they allow for a collection of artists to come in at below market rate value, but it makes the whole thing pencil out. And then you create this amazing, just natural ecosystem of creativity and connections, and create a path towards artists being able to just work full time, because you've got all the connections there with various, whether it's dance agencies or other types of the arts. So really kind of looking outside of the box and seeing what we can do. But to get back more specifically, Ed, to you, I mean, I think that the big reason I'm here tonight and why I know some of you in this room, I'm embarrassed that I don't know more, but I would like to get to know more of what's being done here, is that, let's find paths towards collaborations. Let's fan the flames of what we're all doing here in meaningful ways and sustainable ways. And I mean, just looking at K Street, obviously just from a geography standpoint, I mean, there's a lot of reason to make that place just pop with activity and with, have it be more of an expression of what Sacramento is, and a showcase of the work that's being done here, the talent that's here. And so I'm always available. I mean, I think that we're trying to find how to, kind of what programs can be in place, and how we can be, as an organization, a great community partner and a facilitator of, what's being done here, the work that's being done. But, there's a lot of work. We're still putting together the framework of what that looks like. But would love to see a broad spectrum of art. Would love to see projections on buildings. Would love to see, bless you, gallery spaces that are interactive, but also spaces that, I mean, we know that liability and everything comes into it. So some spaces lend themselves well to producing art that can be viewed from the public realm. Others, there may be opportunities to be more immersive. I mean, we've got a cathedral at 11th and K that I think would be a beautiful canvas for projections. We've got, a lot of great, low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better term for it. But then let's figure out just ways to work collaboratively to breathe life and excitement into that central corridor.
Oh yeah, you want to follow up?
Yeah, just a couple of points. One on the Del Paso issue. what we talked about before, just real briefly, is that...
Do you want the mic?
Okay, first off, the conversations that I've heard are that there are a lot of, that there are at least some organizations, some arts organizations, from what I understood, it was like a theater group that they wanted to, they said that they would be in one of those spaces tomorrow if they could get the landlord to call them back. So Del Paso has a lot of empty buildings that are maybe require some upkeep or some code, code elevation or, getting up to code. But those are beautiful old buildings. They have a history in Sacramento as our old uptown, and they could be a complete arts corridor in that whole space if building owners were incentivized to offer it to community building arts organizations. There are people ready to jump on that. And with regard to developing a place like K Street, I feel like we come back to the same conversation that we had earlier about how Sacramento values or doesn't value artists. If we talk about like including funding for arts or making sure that there is a part of the budget that is, about the arts, then what we're still doing is kind of backburnering and saying that the arts are kind of an additional thing. But if you bring artists into the planning phase, if you allow artists to be part of the structure making of how those things come together, I'm telling you, we'll have the coolest, most amazing bowling alley. You know what I mean? Like, for real, like, we will make it a place that everyone wants to visit. Like, I bring it up a lot, but I'm always thinking of places like Meow Wolf, Art Hotel, Art Street, Coordinates. Like, if those are permanent installations, if those are places that have code enforcement to be something that's permanent, then those are immediately interesting to outside individuals. And that is all based on what local artists can do with a space. So it's not us bringing in other people, other artists from, like LA or San Francisco or whatever to make it cool. It's really saying, like, what can Sacramento artists do to make this space amazing? And trust me, it's here.
I just want to add to that with the Coordinates and Art Hotel are things that you want to become permanent that are not permanent. Instead of code enforcement or fire department coming in after we did the work and made the thing ready for the public, they come in, they see what we did, and then they make it safe instead of saying, no, like fine, fee, no, can't happen, that it's their job to bring it up to code. Like, they see what needs to be done, and then the city says, okay, cool, we'll do that for you. We'll add this here or there, but let the artists do what we're good at doing, right? The ideas, the building, the implementation, sometimes the marketing, but then leave the other stuff that we're not good at, like, putting the fire sprinkler here or making sure that door is in the egress is here and the elevation of the ramp is like this. Make them do that. Like, it's cool. You can point out what needs to be done. Cool, now do it. That's what we can't do. That would be awesome.
And I would just say too, just investing in the spaces that do exist, that be like the space that we have. It's going to be a 25, 30 year plan at this rate of me trying to figure it out, trying to piece it together, get the funding to have housing for artists. This is nothing that's for me. Right? This is a collective space that's going to be left to the community and to our city. I'm just stewarding. I have my own personal projects that now, just from learning that, I'm developing my own spaces and retreat centers and doing my own thing. But this is something I'm doing for the city. It has it's nothing I'm going to give to my children, except they're going to get to benefit of having, a space in our city to go and check out art. But we need investment from city. We need investment from developers, corporate sponsors to help us turn this 25, 30-year plan into a 5-year plan. The building's already here. It's for the city. Yeah. Like, it's for no one else but for the city. Like, what we're doing is to make sure that there's going to be a space long-term for our community. And so that also needs to happen for folks who already have done the hard work of acquiring a building, making sure that that's, especially through a nonprofit or through a trust, that we're saying this is for this city, making sure that we have that investment and that people, you know, understand that we can do it. Oftentimes, I think as women, especially as women of color, people don't trust that we're going to be able to do it. Like, I don't know how many conversations I've had to have. I don't know how many times I have to flex that I have a master's, that we have a $2 million freaking budget, that I drive a Tesla, bruh, I own property. Like, you know what I mean? That I have to flex that so people are like, oh, she might know what she's doing. I have to show them my salary, what I'm getting paid in other cities to do consulting, so that people can say, oh, okay, like, maybe we can trust her, because people look at me and think like, oh, they're not going to be able to manage this project. I'm like, what have I been doing for these past 17 years in the city? Like, straight holding space for creatives. So many businesses have come out of our space. I'm sure, like all of our different spaces, artists, so many different projects have come out of it. I have like young kids that are now adults running our space, you know, where they were children, you know, going to our program. He went to college and came back. So I think that investment back into the spaces that exist is so important. And really seeing what people have done and saying, oh, okay, they can do it. And I'm going to say especially for folks of color, because I don't think there's people who have been doing this work for 30, 35 years, and it breaks my heart that they still don't own a space and that they're still at risk of displacement when they've been holding it down. Sojourner Truth Museum, like we can name them, you know, IMBA, like they're out here, right? They've been doing this work and they still don't own their space. And they've been holding it down for cities. So I think part of that is like, before we even start trying to create new spaces, like let's invest in the spaces that have been doing it for decades, showing that they can do it and strengthen them.
Hell yes.
We are very lucky to have all of you, and I feel really lucky to have interacted with you and just gotten to know all of you over the last couple of years. I'm looking forward to getting to know a lot of you in the years to come. Really cool conversation, and so much left on the table, you guys. I mean, you all knew like the laundry list of questions that I had coming into this conversation, and wasn't exactly sure where we were going to center, but I think we were where we needed to be for tonight's conversation. So amazing. One of the things that I wanted to add, you know, when I was talking to the panelists before we came into this conversation, I was like, hey, y'all, what are the elephants in the room about these kinds of conversations? And it was true. And people, like, I love that people have been so honest with our team about conversations that have been had and that have gone nowhere. And I think, I take that, I mean, you know, in terms of my role, pretty seriously. So I did want to like share a couple of things that are going on for those of you who, I mean, my team, and I think actually Melissa might have had to scoot McDonald's back there. You know, the work that has been happening actually, and what we've been looking at as far as Creative Edge, because work has been happening, and some of the things that you have been calling for are things that we've been actively engaged in. And I just wanted to share a few of those in terms of some of the relationship buildings and kind of what that's yielding for us. Because I never do it, but now I really want to, because there's stuff that's happening and there's more stuff that can happen. And I would just say, you know, when I got here, a big part of the job and some of the stuff that the team was already doing, but that people weren't necessarily validating, was really having conversations with other parts of the city. And there's so much of that really going on. And I'll, you know, just give a shout out to like my colleagues here, Lynette Hall, and I'm not sure if Elizabeth is in the room, or Mikkel Davila, like those folks in the Neighborhood Development Action Team have really been facilitating a lot of cross-departmental conversations. We do think together, economic development, community development, convention and cultural services. We are having those conversations and having them more and more. And increasingly, like, that's yielded some pretty cool stuff, to be honest. Like, there's a project which, I don't know, it was in the Sac Business Journal, but like I was like discovered apparently that folks in the arts community didn't know about it. But, you know, earlier this year I was in conversation, partly because of my relationship with Danielle Foster, who's in housing, about a state surplus property on 8th that CADA and Mutual Housing had an interest in putting forward to get that property and put it forward for artist housing. And they came to me in February, connected by Danielle, and said, hey, can you help us make the case to get the surplus property? And so we did that, and then I didn't hear anything for like months. And then the next thing I know, Danielle reaches out and says, hey, guess what? CADA and Mutual Housing got that property, and they're still intending to do it. And then they asked me another set of questions, and we provided those too. And that could be 242 units of affordable housing in the R Street corridor. So, you know, like, that's what comes from this kind of relationship building and this connection and this mapping that Roshaun is talking about. We've been talking, I mean, Peter is back there, and he's in code enforcement, and I've been having conversations with him and Jose and Tina about, like, our arts and entertainment permitting, you know, and taking a look at special events and you know, with the planning folks around, like, arts and entertainment policy, just generally. Like, we don't really have any arts and entertainment district code in the code anymore. Like, it's a little itty bitty thing, and it's for one specific place. Thanks to Carlo for finding that for me, right? So these kinds of relationships are actually really yielding some results, and some of this stuff definitely takes time to bear fruit, but we planted the seeds, and I think there's a lot of people in the city that are really interested in working together and making change on behalf of the creative community, and that just excites me. That's the stuff that gives me energy, because when we do that, we get more of this and more of that, and that's really exciting. I mean, we got, I would just give a shout out to Donald. He's got the Del Rio Trail project that's live right now. Deadline for the application for that, excuse me, spitting all at you, is November 21st. And for the first time in the public art program, we're really looking, well, for the first time in recent memory, I can't speak overall. Let me just caveat that. You know, we're prioritizing really engaging all sorts of art forms, in terms of, you know, musicians and composers and playwrights and others that might create things to help people engage with that trail as that comes online. And that came because of all of our relationships with the Department of Public Works. There's $1.1 million because we submitted the application for Clean California for the Florin Road Community Beautification Project, because they came in and they said, hey, you know, Sojourner Truth came in and said, hey, we really want to do this. You had to apply through the city, and we just made it happen. So those kinds of things are things that we're really trying to seize upon and act. And it's like, as we're like in the day in, day out with my small team and others, we often don't get an opportunity to talk about it. But those things that you're saying, we're hearing. And we're definitely trying to work on them. So I think this conversation, very cool, very important. I take what these folks have to say really seriously, and as with all of you. And I think there's so much opportunity for us moving forward. So thank you for spending your night here and sharing your insights. And thank you for coming out and joining us for this awesome conversation and more conversations that will hopefully yield change. Have a good one.